Let's go ahead with the last part of the webinar.
Hello, everyone. My name is Han Liu, member of the EMFAC development team. In the last part of the webinar, I'm going to briefly talk about the EMFAC web database. I believe many of you have used the 2011 version of the web database before, and now we have an update on the 2014 version. So like my colleagues just have showed the different components of the EMFAC model, such as the default emission mode will give you the emission based on the ARB's default activity estimates, and the custom activity mode will let you input your own VMT data to get emissions. Then the product specific emission rates you can get from the emission rates or the PL mode. However, we do understand that there are some common use cases that you probably don't need or don't want to install around the model. So the purpose of the EMFAC web database is basically to give you to provide the data support for the most common use cases where the user really don't want to run and install the model. So what's in the web database basically is the daily emissions and emission rates that we pre-run and acquire from the EMFAC model. So the data includes all areas, all calendar years, and all seasons. So the data was pre-generated and was post-processed to work with the web database. So obviously there are some advantages that we're using the web database comparing to running the model. So first, I mean, you don't need to install anything really, and just type in the URL, you're right there. And since it's post-processed, it is faster, especially for the statewide and the MPO and air basins. I'll show you an example later. And also, I think this has been mentioned earlier by Cassie that the EMFAC model will always output the data at the sub-area level. However, in the to be consistent with 2011 web database, in the 2014 web database, we are also outputting the data at the aggregated geographic level. Basically, if you choose the MPO, it will give you the aggregated emissions or emission rates number for that MPO, not for individual sub-areas. And obviously, there are limitations. So first of all, for now, there is no hourly emissions available as mentioned earlier. The reason is that we already have a very large database for now. It's like 500 million rows. But in the future, if we expand our hardware capacity, we might be able to include hourly emissions data too. Second, we do not have the CAT and non-CAT split. That's for the similar reason, and we think it's a relatively a feature that we used less. So then it should be noted that the web interface has always been one-way communication, and it doesn't accept user inputs. So you only give you the for now, it only give you the default emissions or emission rates. But I want to mention that there is a plan to include the emissions that's calculated from using the MPO provided activities. Once this is in development, and once that is done, you will be able to choose when we are requesting the data, you'll be able to choose which version of the activities you would like to use. So it will give you the emissions or emission rates based on the versions of the activities you selected. Like Jen and Cassie mentioned before, so if you do need a temperature and humidity specific emission rates for specific products, you have to run the model on the PL mode. What the web database provides in terms of emission rates, the emission rates are default emission rates based on the default meteorology profile that's built in the EMFAC model. So like I mentioned earlier, both versions are available now. It's just a note that still the currently approved EPA version is still the 2011 version. So please pick the right one for your analysis. I'm going to show a quick demonstration of the interface and the outputs from the web database. So if you have used this before, you know the URL is the lrb.ca.gov/EMFAC. With these two versions concurrently online, that has become an entry page. So when you're here, you'll be able to choose between these two. So I just do a demo with the 2014 one. As you can see, if you use this before, this is almost identical to the 2011 web interface. Actually, from the user side, the only difference here is that we have electric field type in the 2014 version, which did not exist in the 2011 version. So as you can see, this is pretty much similar to what you can select from the model. It's just being presented in a more web-friendly way. So you can choose between emissions or emission rates. You can pick your region. In this case, I'm gonna just pick the statewide to show an extreme case of how much faster it could be, because if you run statewide in the model, meaning you're running every GI, every sub area, but since in the web database we have it post-processed and it's treated as a single area, so it's very fast if you do need the statewide data. So let's just pick one calendar year here. If you do pick two or more than one, as you can see, a message slides out at the bottom asking you to enter a passcode to enable the multiple year downloading. The reason we're doing this is to simply prevent any not likely but possible abuse of the system by malicious users or by clickbots. So you will need to send the email to this address to obtain a passcode. You can use the same passcode for both the 2011 2014 version. So in here, just choose one. If you choose one, it goes away. So for season, just pick one. In 2011 or 2007 vehicle class, you can pick all or only a certain of them, using your control key to select multiple if you need. For model year, you can request aggregated or by model years. If you select pick, similarly, you'll be able to choose which model year you want to pick. So just do aggregated in this case. For speed, it's basically the same as model year, aggregated all speed bins or pick your speed. Let's do aggregated again. For fuel, all or pick one of the three. So when you hit request, download data. As you can see, it's very fast. The file name tells you the version, 2014, and its emission inventory, and the vehicle class types, mod, and the calendar year, and season, and the timestamp, which represents the date and time this file was generated. So this is what it looks like inside. As you can see in the header, it shows version information, the region type, region name, and calendar year, season, vehicle classes, and the units. In the web database output, we're putting the activities and the emissions in the same file. So as you can see here, we have three. We have the population, VMT, and trips, and the emissions are presented in a way that basically each column is a pollutant and process combination. So you will see a lot of columns cross-tab format. So this is the emissions output. If you choose emission rates and everything keep the same and hit download, you will get the emission rates output. As you can see, very similar to the emissions. The emission rates are actually calculated by dividing the emissions by their corresponding activities. So similar format. So this is for the emission rates output. I just want to mention one thing that, as you can see, since we selected aggregated speed, so the web database will give you the output for all process and all pollutants. However, if you do choose, say, all or a certain speed, let's say couple speed here. By selecting speeds, you're implying that you only want the running emissions. So the model will only give you the activities and the emission that's relevant to the running process, as you can see here. Everything else is similar, but there's only VMT and the running emissions present in the output. So this concludes my brief presentation of the web database. And finally, here are some contact information, and this web address has been mentioned several times. This will be the place that you'll find all the documentation here, and our MSEI mailing list, and our dedicated EMFAC 2014 email address. If you have questions, please send your questions to this email. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Hong. Yeah, we have a few questions here. We'll go ahead and start with Diane Vermillion. Her question is, if EMFAC 2014 is not approved by EPA yet, can we use it in project level study? As Kathy alluded to in her study, or in her slides, yeah, we would recommend EMFAC 11, certainly for anything from ARB, but then the approving agency, if this is a regional analysis or analysis for another agency, you would certainly need to check with that agency as to what they would prefer that you use.
So we have a question from Songbai. The web database is very handy, thanks. I'm assuming that EPA is reviewing both the desktop version and the web-based version, so both the EMFAC 2014 tool and the web database. Will EPA approve both versions as a package?
Yeah, really, the web database is a container for output from the EMFAC itself. So EPA is approving, we've submitted the model for their approval. So really, the web database, again, it's a container for output. So we didn't really even need, I think, to request approval for the web database itself.
There are two questions regarding Calimod, one from Victor Velasquez and the other from John Mirskit. So basically, both folks are asking whether what is the difference between EMFAC2014 PL and Calimod. So Victor's asking, how is the PL module EMFAC2014 similar or different from the Calimod for air quality and GHG emission calculation? And John is asking, please describe the differences between EMFAC and Calimod. When should we use one over the other? Their agency is reviewing and prepare SQL analysis for hazard material facility permits.
Yeah, and really, again, this is Vernon. We're not experts in Calimod, so yeah, I guess I would probably refer you to the folks that are the Calimod folks. They may have some knowledge as to the differences between EMFAC and Calimod itself. So yeah, I just don't think we can address those two questions.
Or could I jump in for a minute, because I want to say something else about SQL too. This is John Taylor again. One thing that is different between Calimod and the EMFAC PL2 tool, I believe Calimod does include construction emissions. It does include estimates of construction emissions for new projects, which is something PL doesn't. But that's why, as Vernon's pointing out, for the specific, whatever project you're analyzing, you really need to go to the appropriate agency and find out what exactly is needed. And the other thing I wanted to do was clarify about the SQL analysis. There was a question about using EMFAC2014 versus EMFAC2011 for SQL. In the SQL language, I got clarification. The SQL language says to use the latest available data. And I think that's for any SQL analysis. It doesn't specify specifically motor vehicle data as opposed to stationary source data or any other data that would be, or even for water or other aspects of a SQL analysis. It just says use latest available data. And I think our interpretation is that doesn't necessarily mean to use an unapproved version of EMFAC, but there is nothing in there that really says one way or the other. I mean, if someone chose to use EMFAC2014, again, it really depends what the analysis is and who's doing the reviewing of it. I think where we're coming from is we just think it's prudent to use the currently approved version of the model. But as far as language in SQL, it doesn't specify one way or the other. It just says use latest available data and doesn't define that beyond that. So it's kind of up to each person's own individual interpretation.
Yeah. So just beware of with approving agencies or reviewing agencies of what they would request.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, and then there's a number of questions regarding EPA approval, and really we can't. I don't even want to guess as to timing and such on that. We did submit EMFAC for their approval, and we're awaiting feedback from them, and that's really all I think we can say at this point.
Okay, thanks, Vernon. So we have there's no more question. Okay, there's one more question for SQL GHG analysis. Should we use EMFAC 2011, EMFAC 2014, or other guidance tool? I guess most of the SQL question probably.
I think we just answered.
Oh, we just answered that.
It's not. SQL does not
Okay.
address that. We just feel it's prudent to use the approved version of the model, but it's up to the individual what they choose to use for their SQL analysis and what which agencies are going to be reviewing it. Will they accept that?
Yeah, there's another question. If it's a California project, why would it matter if you use EPA approves? I would understand if it was a NEPA project. So I guess we just answered that generally.
Yeah, we can't. I think we've given as much of an answer as we can in terms of which version, which model, etc. We have no more information on that.
All right. So we'll get to some technical question in terms of the modeling. Andrea Lubovi, how is VMT calculated for EVs? Is there a way to know the miles driven per charge? For electric vehicles, we're assuming the same mileage accrual rates as the conventional gasoline vehicles due to the limited data on the mileage accrual rates for the electric vehicles. We're assuming same mileage accrual rates for them as the gasoline, but we have some ongoing study looking into the EVs and how they're driving. There are several research contracts with UC Davis and other agencies that we're looking at how EVs are driven on the road, and hopefully in the next versions of EMFAC, either short-term or long-term versions of EMFAC, we'll try to address these. There is another. Robert Farley earlier asked a question regarding the whether if EMFAC, since EMFAC uses a VMT scaler, should be also scale MPO VMT MPO base equals MPO base, so project is only the percent growth. And also, so Monty, can you, Robert Farley's question, he was asking if, for example, EMFAC base is 10 million miles and MPO base is 12 million miles and MPO project is 15 million miles, then the scalar 15 over 10 overestimates the project from the MPO, which is 15 over 12.
I think in this case, I think what I would do is like you need to run a two scenario. One is with the MPO first with the project, that is the 12 million, and then you run another scenario with the 15 million VMT. So that's the difference between those two will give you the benefit of that project or the whatever that you're analyzing, trying to do the estimation there. So that's how I would conduct this analysis.
And since you're here, Mani, maybe you can also answer the question from Amir Fanai. Why is planning output format not available in the default activity mode?
Oh, the default activity mode is developed mainly for the database, and it's coming out of the database. It's used to other to communicate to the other database, and as well, that's why we kind of separated it out as an individual, like a VMT, population, trips, and emissions. Whereas the planning inventory is most commonly used one for post-processing any analysis. So that's why the planning inventory provided in a spreadsheet, we try to compile all those information. So that's, we try to be, most user is going to be a SG, like a plan custom activity mode. So that's where people are going to change the data and try to get the corresponding emissions as well as the corresponding activities from that one.
And like Han been presenting in the web data too, I think most of the default emission inventory is also available to the web database too, and that's combine the population, VMT, trips, and emissions in one place, and it's really much easier to use than running the EMFAC.
Yeah, I don't know whether you heard what Kathy said. So as just a few minutes ago, Hong was presenting about the web database. So you can get the same data in a spreadsheet with all those default activity, default population, emissions, and trips. So that's a good place to go and get anything if you're interested in default activity information, rather than running the model and compiling those individual files into one file.
Thanks, Mani. There is a question from Jamie Davis. How do you account for emissions from dual fuel vehicles? For example, plug-in hybrid that can run on both gasoline and electricity. So in EMFAC 2014 and also in our advanced clean car inventory, we're assuming plug-in hybrids have a utility factor, which utility factor means basically on a trip basis how many miles they can drive on electricity and how many miles they can drive, the percentage of mile they're driving electricity versus the overall trip length. We were assuming a utility factor of 40% for plug-in hybrids, and this 40% is coming from our earlier understanding of the plug-in hybrids. So the VMT for plug-in hybrids is separated as electric VMT and gasoline VMT. So the gasoline VMT, the emission associated with the gasoline VMT is calculated based on the emission rate from the conventional gasoline ones certified to the same emission levels as plug-in hybrids. If they're SULEV or they're ULEVs, the same emission rates will be used. And for the electric portion, since again EMFAC is a tailpipe emission model, we're just assuming the zero downstream emissions, zero tailpipe emissions associated with the zero emission vehicles. So with that, I guess we answered most of the question. There are some other questions, as I mentioned earlier, regarding the installation and troubleshooting, which we'll definitely get back to you on that. And you can also contact us at EMFAC2014arb.ca.gov. And with that,
I think for installation or some specific technical issues, if you can send us some screenshots and provide more information to, then it will be easier for us to help.
and we will post this presentation and the recording.
Yeah, it's
in a
probably
PDF form.
probably next week sometime after we get a chance to, as Andy said, split the components into pieces.
Yeah, and then we'll post it on website. So
okay, well that concludes our webinar, and as Sam indicated, we will try to get back to everybody when we haven't addressed specific questions. We'll also be putting together a frequently asked question summary, I guess, on our website. So with that, thank you all, and have a good day.